Our next value is service. We value service at St James's Church. And I want to look at this subject biblically, historically, and then contextually. The core text for our understanding of service is Exodus 35. You may want to go and get a Bible and have a look at that passage as we go through it for the first part of this talk. Exodus 35, and the context is this. Moses has gone up to the mountain and has come back down with the 10 Commandments. And they're not broken this time, and he wants to put them in a place in the midst of the people. He wants to build a place for them, and he wants to build a tabernacle. And he gives a rousing speech to the people of Israel, and he calls them to give of their resources, their time, their gifts, and their talents. So what can we learn from this passage? Well, the first thing that's very interesting is that the first thing that they do after Moses gives this rousing speech is to withdraw. They withdrew. And withdrawing is really important. As we think about ministry at St James's, there's an awful lot of things that we do. We will seek to continue to connect to God, to change with God and transform for God. There'll be all sorts of stuff and ministries that will bring you ideas, vision. But as we do that, we need to guard ourselves against a number of things. And that's why it's important to withdraw. So the first thing we need to guard against is reacting. You know, having a knee-jerk reaction to something. And it's usually an emotional reaction. You know this when you see TV adverts, and the TV adverts ask you for £2 for this or £2 for that, you know, whether it's to look after animals or whether it's to feed the poor or provide water. And they emotionally engage you, and you react emotionally. There's nothing wrong with that. We need to have our emotions stirred if we're going to serve, absolutely. But if it is just a knee-jerk reaction, that's not going to be any good for the longer term. We can't continue to serve just because our emotions are stirred. So we need to withdraw to make sure we're not just reacting. The second thing we must guard against is that we mustn't rescue. We all know rescuers. You may be one yourself. You know, you see a need and you think, well, who's going to do this? This is a massive need. Who's going to do it? And no one steps up to the plate and you say, well, I'll do it then, because it has to be done. You're a rescuer. And again, there's nothing wrong with being a rescuer, to serve when there is a need. But for a long term, it is not sustainable. Rescuers may be serving not out of their gifts, but out of guilt, which is not a good motivator. Rescuers cannot be in it for the long term. And rescuers will block someone else from taking the role that actually they're called to. So we need to withdraw to see if we are just rescuing. The third thing we need to guard against is ignoring. And it's easy to do this, isn't it? When someone says, we need someone to serve here, we just ignore it. We say, I'm too old, I'm too young, I'm too busy. And I'll come back to those three things later on in this talk. Or we say, I haven't got time. Or we say, I did that before, it's someone else's turn. And we just ignore it completely. We need to withdraw to reflect on whether we shouldn't ignore the need that has just been given to us if our first response is to ignore. So back to the passage, they withdrew, and then it says, those whose hearts were warmed came back and gave. Isn't that an interesting word? So it was as if people had withdrawn and prayed and considered and reflected, and those who sort of had an inner something said, yes, this is what I want to do, were warmed, and they brought their gifts. And then in the next verse it says they came willingly. No guilt, no coercion, no oughts. They came willingly because their hearts were warmed. God had done something in them as they had withdrawn, and they came willingly and gave of their gifts. And then it says, they brought what they had. They brought what they had. So they didn't look around them and say, well, I haven't got anything. Or they didn't look around at someone else and say, well, they've got much more than me, or they're more gifted than me, or they've got more time than me, or whatever. They came and brought what they had, and they gave it. Moving on to the New Testament, Paul talks about us being the body of Christ and how we need each other. And we need each other because we each play a part. It's just like each part of the body plays a part. We come with what we have. And the result of this appeal and their withdrawing, their warming, their willingness, their bringing what they had, was that the tabernacle was built. And actually Moses had to say, stop, we've got enough, thank you very much. Now a tabernacle is built of, well, I don't know what it's built of actually, but you can only have enough bricks and enough gold and enough jewels, and once you've got everything, then it's finite, it's finished. But ministry, serving the Lord, connecting, changing and transforming our community is a never-ending task. We won't come to the end of it. But we're called to serve, and I think letting our hearts be warm to come willingly and to come with what we have. If you read on in the biblical narrative, if you get into Leviticus rather, this is where most people give up when they're reading the Bible. It's the laws, and God is building this community. The community, and he tells them how to thrive. He tells them what to do about their health. He tells them what to do about their wealth. He tells them what to do about their cleanliness. He tells them what to do about how they look after the poor and the widows and the downtrodden. He tells them how to look after the foreigner who is among them. All these laws are there so that they will be the people of God and the people of God who thrive and then are going to be a blessing to others. And then we move on into the New Testament again, and remember the first calling was to the people of Israel. The second calling was to those who are following Christ, the Christians, as they were known in the first century. And we're grafted onto the old. And just as God gave instructions to serve in the first covenant, he gives instructions and an example to serve in the new covenant too. And we read about it in Acts, and we get back to this passage again and again, where people, the new Christians, the new church, gathered together and shared everything, and no one was in need, and God added to the number those who were being saved. A community in which to live and to share and to give and to thrive. So there we have the biblical narrative, the reason to serve. But if we look at church history too, we can see that service has always been part of that church history right from the very start. It's the church who started the schools. It was the church who looked at the way prisoners were being treated and about prison reform. It was the church who were at the forefront and the vanguard of the abolition of slavery. It was the church who built the hospitals to care for others. The church has always been part at the vanguard of serving a community, transforming a community. It's something that we handed over to the state, but increasingly the state is handing it back to us. What an opportunity to serve those we live amongst who don't yet know him. So we're called to serve. And there are all sorts of ministries. So that's the history, if you like. And here at St. James's, there are all sorts of ministries that we do which serve others. But behind those ministries, as we come on to think contextually, there are always stories. So we have the CAP ministry. But behind the CAP ministry, there's a story. There are many stories. But the story just this week of someone who had become debt-free because of the ministry of CAP. Yes, CAP Bradford, but also Graham, our CAP centre worker, and the befrienders that have befriended them. They become debt-free. Then there is the young person who was 17 and who spent 7 years with us, now gone off to university, who said that in that 7 years he's grown in his love for God and an understanding of his word. There's always people, stories behind the ministry. And then if we go into Africa, to Eldoret and our partnership with King's Highway Church, people who have a business now because we've given them seed money to enable them to start businesses. The school that has a gate around its crops because a fence around its crop field now, so that the cows don't eat the crops, so that they can feed the school and the community and give to those who don't have. The church that has Wi-Fi so that they can reach the community. And then our children's outreach, the 40 or so children who come to our Rockin outreach every week, who say the thing that they most enjoy is praying. And these who are not yet Christian yet. The young people who are standing up and taking a lead in worship. The older people who have been delighted to receive cards and messages from other people in the church to say, we're remembering you, we're praying for you. Their delight at receiving those. All sorts of ministries, TLG, families that have been engaged and helped, young people that are now engaging with school when they weren't before. All sorts of ministries that have stories behind them. That's why we do it. Changing, transformation. Now sometimes we just have to serve because we're part of the family. The other week I was doing my sermon preparation in the study, and my wife Della was looking after 2 grandchildren, 2 little girls. And at that point, another of my daughters came round with her very young baby. And the baby was a little fractious, and my daughter was very tired, as you are with a young baby. And these 2 other toddlers, it was getting towards tea time, and it had been a long day. And there I was trying to write my sermon in my study. Now, I could have carried on. It was a bit noisy and it was quite distracting, really. But I knew that I had to, although it wasn't my intention, I needed to serve. And so I got up from my desk and thought, well, what can I do? Well, I'm no good with fractious babies, to be honest. But what I can do is make tea. And so I left my sermon preparation for another day and made tea. Just did something because the family needed it. And that's what we need as we serve. We are a family, we have a ministry, we have an outreach. And sometimes you have to do things that you don't particularly want to do, but you do them because you're part of the family. But we see service much deeper than that too. And one of the courses on our discipleship track is the Equipped, Gifted and Released course, which really seeks to find people's gifts and passions, finds the way people, the personalities and the way people work, and looks at the time they have to serve. We want to release people into the shape that they can be, if you like, round pegs in round holes. That's the best way to work. And the Equipped and Gifted Release course seeks to do just that. Not to think, well, these are the jobs that we need to fill, but these are the people that we have. Where should they be serving? So let me tell you some stories from that course that we've had over the time. So there was firstly one person who felt released to be a teacher in a school. Maybe there had been guilt that actually, well, she should be serving the church, should she be doing more in church. But as she went through the course, realised no, her gifting was teaching, and her place to perform that was in a school in a secular setting. And then there was the person who were released to be the person that God had created them to be. This person found that when notices were given out to serve in children's work or youth work, they never wanted to do it because they didn't want to get trapped into doing it, and they couldn't sustain it, and they felt very guilty about that. But through the Equipped and Gifted and Release course, they realised that the sort of person they were was a short-term projects person. They could give a little of their time for a short space of time and to be very creative in that. And so instead of volunteering for children's work forever in a day, they would volunteer to do a craft and to present a craft, or to do Little Fish's craft activities. And then there was the person who had done prayer ministry all their lives, but felt really affirmed once they had done the Equipped and Gifted course. No, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. And then there was the person who found that their spiritual gift was helps, and they had a passion for finance. And so now they are working with CAP Money and helping people with their finances. It became a fit for them. And then my favourite one of all, which goes back a long way, a person who had a passion and found a passion for the developing world, the poor, the marginalised, and felt just so inspired once they did this course that was what they were called to do. And they followed that up. They went to Africa, they took over the tiercraft and the tradecraft and the tier fund stuff. And now, 15 years on, they are now part of the team that has set up the Shop of Hope, which is serving the community, doing fair trade, fair stuff. How exciting is that? So the Equipped and Gifted and Release course, I really would encourage you to look out for that, because it enables you to work in your passions and giftings. It's not about filling the spaces that we have, but about enabling you to be the people that you're called to be. I want to finally talk to three types of people who may be watching this. The first type of people are those who say, I'm too young. And I want to, in all these ways, with all these things, start with an apology to say sorry that we in leadership, particularly the baby boomer generation of which I'm a part, has taken leadership and has held it very tightly to ourselves. We want to give permission for younger leaders to develop. But more than permission, we want to do it. We want to develop you. We want to enable you to be the leaders God called you to be. Now that will mean us stepping back. It will mean us encouraging you. It will mean us not being upfront. It will mean us advising you, praying for you, supervising you, evaluating you. But we want to develop younger leaders so that they can lead the church today, not just tomorrow. Secondly, you may be saying, I'm too old. I want to speak to you if you're saying that. And again, start with an apology. I'm sorry if the church moving on has felt that you've been left behind. That is never the intention, but it can be the perception and the feeling that you have. So I'm sorry if that is how you feel. We value everyone in our church. But the world is crying out, the church is crying out for spiritual mothers and fathers. The prophet said that back in in the Old Covenant. Where are the spiritual mothers and fathers? And we cry out today for spiritual mums and dads, to be younger people's mums and dads spiritually. We have a system of mentoring. Maybe you can become a mentor for a younger person, to walk alongside them, to share with them, to talk with them, to share your experiences, to pray for them. You may not want to do this in a formal fashion, but you can. Please let us know if you want to do that. Or informally, in church, as you meet young people, get to know them. Now, I'm not just talking the under 20s, I'm talking the under 40s. Get to know them, get to know their story, speak into their lives, pray for them, encourage them. Become a spiritual mum and dad. And if you can do that, please come and see us as well. My dad is 92 today. He took early retirement and became a vicar. He had a parish, and then he was very involved in his church. But now he's not able to do that anymore. And he sees his ministry as prayer. And he spends most of his day up in his back room looking out over the garden praying. Praying for his family, which is large, and the world and his church and lots of organisations that he's involved with. He's interceding. We can all do that. Take prayer seriously. It's not an added extra or something, oh well, all I can do is pray. It's massive. In fact, one of my daughters rings him every Sunday, and she said just yesterday, I feel so much better having spoken to him. He always brings a bigger perspective. He always has a word of wisdom for me. Too old? No. In fact, we were reflecting just the other day as a team that some of the most vibrant small groups in our church are run by 70-year-olds. And finally, I want to say to those of you who are saying, I'm too busy to serve. Again, I apologise and I'm sorry that we have often guilted you into serving. We have often given you the oughts. We have often squeezed you into working for the church, and though we've taken you away from your family and taken you away from your workplace and squeezed you to serve the church. We want to release you to be a Christian, a leader on your front line, whether that is in your family or in your workplace or in your community. That is our first desire. But if you are saying you're too busy, let me just share an observation that I've had over many years of leadership. It's this, that there are seasons in our lives. There's a season when we are building a career and we're so busy doing that, we don't have time. There is a season when we have a young family and it's all consuming. There is a season when our children get a little bit older and we're ferrying them to Cubs and Scouts and football and tennis and badminton and da-da-da-da-da, wanting them to do all the things that children need and want to do. And then there is a season when we have teenagers and we're pulling our hair out because our teenagers they're teenagers. There's always a time when we're busy. And my observation is this: don't let a season of busyness become a habit. If you no longer have little children, what space have you now to serve? If you no longer have teenagers, what space do you have now to serve? If you have stopped, your career isn't as busy and you're a bit less, you're older and you're a bit less stressed, where can you serve? Don't let a season become a habit. And maybe it's important to do that withdrawing to reflect and not to say, I'm too busy. And a word about our staff. I'm so pleased that we have staff. Thank you for enabling that to happen. Many of the ministries that we do wouldn't be happening without those staff. But the danger of having staff is that we think, well, they'll do all the work. They can't do all the work. The CAP Centre manager needs the befrienders, needs the prayers. The youth minister needs the volunteers. The children's minister needs the volunteers. But I hate that word volunteers, actually. I'd much rather use servers. We have paid people, but we also have people who are unpaid, but they're both serving. So please consider how you can serve and not just say, well, it's their job. Bill Hybels says this, that the church is the hope of the nation. If we really believe that, then we need to serve that church as that church serves the community. We are the body of Christ, whether we're a leg, an arm, a hand, an ear or an eye. we need each other to be the whole body, to play our parts, to serve our community and our neighbourhood and networks, so that we can bring good news of Jesus Christ, so that we can be the good news of Jesus Christ and build the kingdom, because the church is the hope of the nation.